Hi friends, I'm Chelsea and I'm here with my March reading wrap up. I got some tea here and I'm going to tell you about my books. I read 9 books in the month of March, read every book on my TBR except for one. I honestly cannot believe that. So I'm very happy I stuck with my TBR and I really enjoyed it. Most of these books actually are like 4.5 stars or above, so I had a really good reading month, lots of new favorites, and I cannot wait to talk to you about them. I'm going to take a sip of my spiced apple butter tea in my David Rose mug, then we're going to get started. So first up, at the beginning of March, we'll see if I can remember all of these books because it feels like it's been a long month. The first book I read in March was Chain Gang All-Stars by Nanukwame Adebrenya. This is a literary fiction dystopian. I might have to reference this because it's been a whole month since I read this. Basically, this is about future America, but not very distant. The prison system is set up where people can choose to get out of prison in a shorter amount of time by participating in what is called the CAPE program, which that stands for Criminal Action Penal Entertainment. It's a highly popular, highly controversial, profit-raising program in America's increasingly dominant private prison industry, and it's a gladiator program. People fight to the death, and if they make their way through this program over the course of 3 years, they get to be free and not be in prison anymore. It kind of feels like Hunger Games a little bit, and of course it's like an entertainment, so people love watching this on their huge screen TVs. And so the two main characters, their names are Thurwar and Stax. Those are their gladiator names. They are 2 of the top women gladiators in this whole system who are also a couple, and so they're on the same chain, which means they're all in this group of prisoners that fight together. So it basically just follows these two, their journey, and then it also follows some other characters. There's a lot of characters in this one. This is just a crazy look at the American prison system. Of course, it deals with like systemic racism, capitalism, consumerism, all the isms. It's pretty wild. I had a lot of thoughts. This was a really crazy book, really intense, really good. I highly recommend it. This is a very dark, violent, disturbing, heavy book, so be aware of that. But it's also probably like the most unique book I have read. It's just the writing style, the plot, characters. I thought it was really well done and unique. It got right to it. There was a lot of action. It did take me a little bit to get into the writing style just because it is so unique, and there's a lot of different characters, and the chapters are kind of all over the place at the beginning. I wasn't really sure how it was going to all fit together. I did get into it after some time and it really hooked me. The chapters are pretty short, so it kind of made it easy to read quickly. I was feeling all the emotions and really enjoyed getting to know these characters. I felt so like attached to them. These characters were just so real and lovable. There's some kind of found family vibes here. I learned a lot in this book about our prison system. So the author had a lot of like footnotes of real statistics and facts about our prison system, and there were just a bunch of things that were kind of tied into the fictional story. One of the ones that really stuck out to me that I did not know, one of these facts was that almost 100,000 people who are incarcerated in the US are innocent. So, that's great. There were definitely some characters in this that were falsely imprisoned, and then, of course, others that had committed crimes, but some of them that were just like self-defense, especially the women. But of course, they were still criminalized. And then even the ones who had committed real crimes, this book really makes you realize like these are real people. They have as much dignity and worth as the next person. Every life is precious. No one is beyond redemption. Also, like how disturbing it is that people kind of love to see this death and destruction, and it was like entertainment for them. There were a couple quotes in this that I really enjoyed that I wanted to read. Honestly, you could just pick a page, point to a quote, you'll find something really good. Here were a couple parts that I liked. And this is about one of the main characters, Stax, who I really liked, and she was super interesting. Here's the quote. She forced love into this loveless space, made it the subject of her life. She showed them that she was capable of great love, and that if they'd look, they'd see they were too. And maybe someday they'd understand what they'd enabled, what they'd created. And that was kind of her whole goal throughout this book, kind of bringing love to the situation, to these people, even though obviously there's not a lot of love or brightness in this situation, but she was taking that approach and hoping that they would think about what they've allowed to happen. And so that really hit me. And then I think this was Thurwar, this cat, man. Okay, here's the quote. Remember that just because something is doesn't mean it can't change. And just because you haven't seen something before, that doesn't mean it's impossible. I just love that these characters did have hope and optimism for the future, even though they knew it was super bleak and that most of them wouldn't survive. I also really loved Mari. She was one of the characters, and she had a really good dialogue with an interviewer, because there's an aspect of this, there's like protesters who are protesting this system. There are a lot of parallels to a lot of things in our current society, and she just had a really good, thoughtful, balanced conversation with an interviewer. And okay, I'm sorry. This kind of feels all over the place, but this book made me think a lot, made me feel all the things. The ending was kind of wild. At first, I was like, what happened? Because I feel like it was kind of unclear, but then it hit me and I was like, whoa, I thought this was really well done. I highly recommend this book. Next up, I read The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton. I listened to the audiobook, and this is for my book club. This one, I would say, is like Knives Out, Agatha Christie vibes. Clue meets Freaky Friday meets Groundhog Day, which is kind of an interesting concept. A lot of kind of unique things there. And so basically the premise of this one is there is this family, the Hardcastles. They live in this classic Clue type mansion. They're hosting a masquerade, inviting all these people, but there's a murder of Evelyn Hardcastle, as you can surmise from the title. So she is murdered, and then this random guy named Aidan Bishop, he somehow shows up, and he is tasked with solving the murder, but he gets to live each day in a different person's body and kind of solve the murder from their perspective, gathering different information from all of them. If he doesn't solve it, he wakes up in someone else's body, and it's just, that's like the Groundhog Day part of it. So this was a very unique, interesting premise, great atmosphere, very vivid, descriptive, spooky. This would be a great fall read. I kind of wish I had waited to read it in the fall. This author, I can tell he put a lot of thought into it, like really genius, intricate plot and premise and all that. But for me, I did not love it, honestly. I know a lot of people have loved this one. I was just kind of confused with like all the time loops and different people. There were a lot of characters, and early on I was very confused. I think it's supposed to be confusing because the main character, Aiden, is confused because he's in someone else's body. I did start to get it by like chapter 9 or something, but it was still a lot to keep up with, and honestly just wasn't super engaged. Just overall felt very repetitive to me. He would like go back to someone's body because of something that happened and then like relive the same day. And I could see how it would be interesting to kind of piece it all together if your mind kind of works that way. But for me, it just felt too repetitive, and I just kind of wanted it to be over. It felt kind of long. I did like the ending. There were some good twists. I was like finally really interested at the end. I will read a quote to kind of give you an idea of the writing style, because I really did like the atmosphere. I could picture it very well. Here's just one of the quotes. The air is heavy, sweet with perfume, stirred only by a scratchy music that soars and glides and stuns itself against the walls. The mood in the room is one of restless agitation rather than celebration. So next up, I listened to Anne of Green Gables by L.M. Montgomery, narrated by Rachel McAdams, and I really enjoyed her narration of it. So this was my color in the title prompt, and it was also her middle grade March. I absolutely loved this one. I don't think I ever read it, and I missed out. So I'm really glad I finally got to this. It was just super cozy, whimsical, funny, heartwarming. I felt like this was great for spring, even though it takes place over all these seasons and a lot of different times in her life. So this one is about a young girl named Anne. She's, I think, 11 when the book starts. She's an orphan, and Matthew and Marilla, they're brothers and sister, and they want to adopt this orphan boy. And when they go to pick him up, there's a girl there instead, and they're like, what happened? But they end up taking her home. She wins them over with her charming personality. Basically just chronicles her life from age 11 to 16, I think, and just kind of their family relationship that forms, her friendships, just a coming of age kind of story. It's not like a huge plot, feels more like slice of life, and it's set in Canada, which was kind of fun. I'm 25% Canadian, and I didn't know it was a Canadian story, so I thought that was cool. This one had great nature descriptions and just really beautiful prose and writing, and had a lot of focus on like family and friendships, not really any romance, because, you know, she's pretty young. I just loved Anne. She is such a fun character. She's so imaginative and funny, just super like chaotic, dramatic, very whimsical, passionate, stubborn, and just full of wonder and zest for life. She matured over time, but she never lost that youthful spirit, and I just loved her. She was so real and relatable. She had her flaws, but she was just super sweet and funny. She would just like go on and like talk forever, and Marilla especially was always sick of her talking. It was just like a monologue. It's really funny. I did really love Matthew and Marilla as well. She really softened them and helped them open up, and it was really sweet to watch that progression in their lives and just their relationships, how they all became a family. I laughed, I cried, I just felt all the emotions. Just like a really good classic if you don't read classics or if you kind of want to get into them. I thought this was really sweet. I definitely want to read more of the books in the series. I actually picked up the second book and hope to read that sometime. I'm going to read a couple of quotes for you. This first one is very iconic, but I love it. I'm so glad I live in a world where there are Octobers. And same. That's when my birthday is, and I just love fall. And this next one is a short one, but I love it. But the best of it all was the coming home. And then this one is kind of one of Anne's monologues, which cracks me up. Isn't it splendid to think of all the things there are to find out about? It makes me feel glad to be alive. It's such an interesting world. It wouldn't be half so interesting if we knew all about everything, would it? Am I talking too much? People are always telling me I do. If you say so, I'll stop. I can stop when I make up my mind to it, although it's difficult. This was a great book. I loved it. Okay, these next 3 books were in my reading vlog that I posted a couple weeks ago, so I'm not going to talk a ton about them, but I am going to go into them a little bit. But if you want a little more in-depth information, you can watch my reading vlog. So this one is Emily Wilde's Map of the Otherlands. This is book 2. So the first book is Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. I loved both of them. I love this one even more than the first. I just love these characters, Emily and Wendell. Like I said in my other video, this is one of my favorite fictional couples, and Wendell is just one of my favorite characters. He's just ridiculous in the best way. With this being the second book, I'm not going to say a ton about it. Again, I go into it a little in that video. I won't say anything that's not on the back here. But if you haven't read the first book, you might not know some of this. So Emily Wilde is a scholar at Cambridge University. In the first book, she wrote an encyclopedia of fairies. And in this book, she is working on a map of the Otherlands. Shocking, I know. She and Wendell kind of went on an adventure in the first book. They're back at Cambridge, but early on in the book, there's an attack on the university. These fairy assassins are coming after Wendell because he's an exiled fairy monarch and he's searching for a way back to his realm, but he has assassins who are sent after him. They have to leave the university to try to get away. They end up in the Austrian Alps along with Emily's niece Ariadne and Rose, the head of the Dryadology or the fairy studies department, and Emily's dog Shadow. So they all go off to the Alps and she's working on her map. They're also looking for that door for Wendell, and it's just a bunch more like fairy type adventures, cozy vibes, cute little sweet romance, very similar to the first book. I just love this one. I feel like this kind of book is my ideal kind of book, just like a historical setting with fantasy elements, magical fairies, romance with a little mystery. I just enjoyed every moment of this. It was very quirky, cozy, like the first one, but it did have some adventure, good twists and turns, and I'm super excited for the next book. I just love the writing in these books. It's just really funny without trying too hard, especially with Emily's perspective. She's just like a socially awkward, quirky kind of person, and I relate to her a lot. She can be a little standoffish at times and should probably be a little nicer to people, especially her niece. I also just love the description of nature, the fairies. It really brings you into it. And this feels like a good spring book too, even though I think it's in the fall. Just anything that's kind of set in like nature and the outdoors feels like good for spring, I guess. I know some people have said these books can be kind of slow at times, and that's fair. Like probably why it's not a full 5-star for me. I don't really mind slow books, but if you don't like them, then you might not like this. I was just smiling and laughing so much at Emily and Wendell, just their dynamic. It's super cute, super funny. They're always just teasing each other. Their banter is great, and it's definitely a slow burn romance. There's a little more in this book, and it's just kind of the slow progression of things. Wendell is just hilarious to me. He's just like the most extra person. That's really all I can say. He's high drama, loves to clean, he loves to be comfortable. He just gets all worked up about the most ridiculous things, and he's great. I love him. I enjoyed seeing these new characters, getting to know them. I also enjoyed having some older characters from the first book come back. And this one I actually started on audiobook a while back and wasn't loving it, and so I'm really glad I switched to physical because I really enjoyed that experience. All in all, I really love this book. I love this series so much, and I am always recommending it to people. Here is a quote from Wendell that just kind of sums up his personality. Why is it that my enemies always come at me when I am tired and hungry? Why cannot I deal with my stepmother's hirelings on a full stomach, having had a good night's rest in some comfortable bed? Assassins are a monstrous breed. Either they attack when you are at your worst, or they are having a go at you on your birthday. I have never known a more dishonorable profession. That's Wendell for you. Next up, here we are with this bad boy, House of Sky and Breath. Crescent City #2 by Sarah J. Maas. I think I got about halfway through this in my reading vlog. I did not give you my full thoughts. This is the second book in the series, so I'm not going to say much again because I don't want to spoil the first book. This book follows Bryce and Hunt, the two main characters. There's a lot of stuff that happened at the end of the first book, and they're kind of just dealing with the after effects of that. They're also kind of holding things off in their relationship so they can give themselves time to really get to know each other. And then also they are kind of thrown into this rebel movement against the Asteri, who are kind of the powers that be. They've specifically been told not to get involved in anything, to just kind of lay low, live their lives, but they have this whole group of friends and people who are kind of getting involved whether they want to or not, and it just kind of follows them as things unfold. And there's a lot of emphasis on like the politics and the rebellion, less of the murder mystery feel of the first book. There's still kind of some mystery vibes, but more of the politics and the rebellion. It feels a lot more like Hunger Games Mockingjay. 800 pages, y'all. I did it. I listened to it. This was my book with a map prompt. Yeah, I'll just say I did not enjoy this as much as the first book. I think I gave the first book like a 4.5. It was all right. It felt way too long. It felt kind of slow and boring at the beginning. Like not much was happening. It did pick up a little bit like halfway through, and then in typical Sarah J. Maas fashion, the ending was insane. If you read this, you know about the ending. My jaw dropped and I was not expecting that twist. I have mixed feelings about the ending. I was honestly not even sure if I wanted to read the third book, and now I'm like, I feel like I have to read the third book just to see where she goes with this. Very intrigued. This one I did enjoy the plot and the premise overall. I think the main complaint for me, I just don't really love or connect with the two main characters, Bryce and Hunt, as people, but also in their romance. It's just like meh to me. Not very invested in them, and I just can't handle the spicy scenes, which there were a lot more of them in this book. Like, no, it's too much for me. With them, I just feel like there's not much substance or depth in their personality. That was not the case for me with a lot of the characters in ACOTAR. Like, I felt like there was a lot more going on. And so with these two, it just felt like there was not much going on there. Their personalities just kind of bugged me over time while reading. I did like the side characters a lot, enjoyed those point of views. There were a lot of POVs in this book, and that was a little like jarring at times. I kind of wanted there to be more of the women's perspectives, like Juniper, Fury, and some other ones, because it was very male heavy besides Bryce. I did like the guys like apartment crew. They were really funny. Ethan, Deck, Flynn, and Tharian. There were some good like humorous moments there. I went on a rant about this, but like if I don't connect with the two main characters, it's not going to be a great time for me. I really love character-driven books. They get so much emphasis in all 800 pages. It was hard for me to get through at times, but like I said, I did start to enjoy it more as it went on. I didn't hate it like some people have. It was not my favorite. I had a hard time searching for quotes because I feel like this is not a super quotable book for some reason, but here's one from Tharian. Was a rebellion worth fighting if it only put other power-hungry leaders in charge? For the innocents, yes, but Tharian couldn't help but wonder if there was a better way to fight this war, better people to lead it. Would I recommend this book? Probably not, but gotta read it to get to the third book, and I don't know if the third book's worth reading. I haven't read it. I probably will. Okay, moving on to much better things. This is my 5-star read and my new obsession right now. That is Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. I know so many people love this book, and now I understand why. I just love it so much. I love these characters. I love the story. I love this world. I am reading Crooked Kingdom right now, and as soon as I finished this, I was like, all right, gotta read it, which I read another book first that I didn't really love, and I'll talk to you about that one. Don't look over here. So this one is set in the Grisha-verse, which is the world of Shadow and Bone, and Grisha are people basically with magical powers, but they can control the elements. This is set in Ketterdam, a made-up place, and this follows Kazbecker and his crew of teenage criminal masterminds. Well, he's a criminal mastermind. His friends are maybe not. So they have this gang called the Dregs, and it's just a bunch of random people who are kind of on the fringe of society, and they are offered a chance to pull off this really dangerous heist, and he kind of pulls a crew together, and they go and It's kind of just a crazy magical heist story, lots of found family and lots of drama, little hints of romance. Not really a main element of the book. It's just a really good time. I loved literally every second of this. I think reading Crescent City and Six of Crows at the same time, that's what kind of made me see the difference between the characters, because I feel like the characters in Six of Crows are so well written, intricate, so layered. Their backstories, there's just so much going on there. And I just connected with all of them, even though they're very morally gray. I was just rooting for them, very invested like the whole time. And I didn't really feel that way in Crescent City. It highlighted even more what I loved about Six of Crows. And then just story-wise, I just loved this. I was hooked very early on. I just had to keep reading. It was very fast paced for me and read very like cinematically, which makes sense because they made it into a TV show. And I was picturing a lot of that, even though it's kind of different in some ways. And I just thought it was a great combination of having the heist in the present day with the backstories kind of woven in. I could get really a good idea of where these characters have been and where they are now, kind of what their motivations are. I read the first Shadow and Bone, hadn't finished the series, and then I've watched the whole show. So I was really glad I had that context, because I might have been like a little confused if I hadn't had any prior knowledge, since this is a separate duology that kind of takes place after Shadow and Bone. So I would recommend having at least some knowledge. You don't have to read the whole series of Shadow and Bone. It also felt very different from the show, which, was it different or do I just have a bad memory? I don't really know. Also, like the atmosphere in this was very dark and gritty. Just loved it. And I love her writing style. I feel like it just cuts straight to the heart without saying much. Just really great writing. The banter is hilarious. There are a lot of really funny moments, especially Jesper. He's one of my favorites. And just him and Wyland, kind of like their dynamic was hilarious. Kaz is great. He's like the smartest, most cunning person ever, and I just love Inej, Nina, Matthias, like literally all these characters. I feel like they're like my best friends now. I just love them so much. Oh, I keep forgetting to mention this. This was my phone a friend prompt. Thank you, Michelle, for picking this book because it's like my new favorite. I'm gonna say some quotes, then that's it. This is one of my favorite quotes, and this was Inej talking to Kaz. I will have you without armor, Kazbrecker, or I will not have you at all. Next one is Kaz. When everyone knows you're a monster, you needn't waste time during... I can't read my own handwriting. Okay, let me try that again. When everyone knows you're a monster, you needn't waste time doing every monstrous thing. And then this is about Kaz and Inej. Though he trusted her with his life countless times, it felt much more frightening to trust her with his shame. I highly suggest reading this one if you haven't already. So good. Okay, we got 3 more books here. This next one was probably my second favorite after Six of Crows, so 2 really good ones in a row. This is Finding Me by Viola Davis. I listened to the audiobook, which she narrated and did an amazing job at. This was my memoir / nonfiction prompt. This is now tied with Know My Name by Chanel Miller as my favorite memoir. This was so good. This just goes into her life, focus more on the personal elements of her life. It does go into her career and acting and all that, but it's just a really raw, honest look at her early years, school and college, her career and all that. Basically, she grew up in extreme poverty with abuse, alcoholism, a really rough family situation, dealing with like racism, prejudice, bullying, name calling at school, and just a very difficult upbringing. Then it kind of goes into her school life and how she got into acting and theater, and then over time, her career, relationships, and stuff. This is super raw and honest, definitely very heavy material. She is just so eloquent and intelligent and just really told her story really well. This was super powerful and profound. There were so many great themes here. I'll just read them, I guess. Themes of hope, love, redemption, faith, resilience, sisterhood, and also creating your own family, gratitude, pursuing your dreams, embracing and loving yourself, and not shying away from your cultural or ethnic identity, even when people put you in a box based on your appearance. I'll talk about that in a little bit. She just talks a lot about her identity as a Black woman and how that has affected her life, and finally coming to terms with loving herself and accepting herself and not putting herself last, because when you grow up in a really difficult situation, you kind of are just in survival mode. And she has tried to help her family. She's also had this experience finding herself and really loving herself as well. She talks about how acting was kind of her safe haven. She talks about the struggle of pursuing a creative career, especially with being poor, like not knowing how you'll provide for yourself or your family. I just loved hearing about everything that kind of brought her to where she is today, everyone that helped her. I had known that she was in The Help and How to Get Away with Murder, but I didn't really know much else about her. And so I learned a lot about her life and her career. She is just so incredibly strong and resilient and so optimistic in the face of all this hardship. She never seems cynical or bitter. She's just trying to make the best of it and trying to make the world a better place. This is a very inspiring story. I got emotional multiple times. Towards the end, she kind of talked about how she's really working to change the perception of Black women as being undesirable, especially in Hollywood. She just talked about how all these experiences of not getting certain roles or feeling less than just because she is a Black woman, especially with like darker skin and a deeper voice and just not feeling desirable. But she really found that in her role in How to Get Away with Murder, and that was a later role after lots of time in acting. I also love this because this is a great example of someone who has found success kind of later in life. She really got famous more when she was like in her 40s, so not that that's that old, but she had worked at it for a long time. She also didn't get married till she was 38. It's just a great example of someone who's really pursuing their dreams and sticking with it. I'm going to give you some quotes here. Forgiveness is giving up all hope of a different past. If I created a fable of my life, a fantasy, I see myself finally meeting God, gushing, crying, thanking the Almighty for the accolades, a fabulous husband, beautiful daughter, my journey from nothing to Hollywood, awards, travel. I can clearly see the Lord's face staring at me, taking me in and saying, "You never thanked me for creating you as you." I highly recommend Finding Me. Loved this one. So well done. This is the last physical book I read in the month of March, and this is The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. This was my prompt that was a book about books, which honestly it's not really about books. I didn't know that at the time. The books are featured, so we'll take that. I don't even know what genre to categorize this as. It feels kind of just like contemporary fiction with a magical realism feel, mental health focus. I don't know. Contemporary, mental health, magical realism, whatever genre that is. This here says, between life and death, there is a library. And Nora Seed is the main character. Early on, you realize she does not want to keep living. She tries to commit suicide. She ends up in this holding place, basically, between life and death. It's called the Midnight Library. There's all these books where they're like alternate lives, and she can choose to live any of them and see if she wants to live. So obviously there's some heavy mental health kind of themes here, so be aware of that. Depression, suicide. So this one I kind of have mixed feelings about. I enjoyed this overall. There were some really good takeaways, and I read it really fast. It's under 300 pages. It's a pretty quick, easy read. I was intrigued most of the time to keep going. Then some other parts for me were just okay. It wasn't like a top new favorite. At first, I was kind of not loving the writing or the main character. I felt like I could kind of predict where the book was going. I just didn't feel super connected to her as a character. A lot of things in this felt very repetitive. This is kind of like Evelyn Hardcastle. It's not a time loop, but her going into these alternate lives. A lot of the book is just literally picking a life and going into it and then leaving and trying another one out and so on. It kind of got repetitive after a couple times, and also every time she went into one she was just completely confused and had no idea what was going on. That kind of got old for me too. There were some unexpected elements for me that made it not as predictable as I thought, and I liked the conclusions and the ending, but it didn't feel like super profound to me. I did like how her perspective changed over time and how she focused more on other people. There was a really good mental health discussion here, and it made me think about my own life and decisions and just things I'm grateful for. So it did leave me thinking about some good stuff, but also at the same time not like super mind-blowing or anything new necessarily. This one to me felt a little bit like The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, in that she gets to live all these different lives. I liked Addie LaRue a lot more, but it kind of felt like that. Also felt like the show Loki with the parallel universe, multiverse. Luckily this one was not very confusing, so that was good. So like I said, I have mixed feelings about this. I think I would recommend it. It just wasn't like a top new favorite for me. There's some quotes here. The only way to learn is to live. The prison wasn't the place, but the perspective. Yesterday, I knew I had no future and that it was impossible to accept my life as it is now. And yet today, that same messy life seems full of hope, potential. The impossible happens via living. Will my life be miraculously free from pain, despair, grief, heartbreak, hardship, loneliness, depression? No. But do I want to live? Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. Okay, last one, and I honestly only thought I was going to read 8 books. I'm cheating a little bit here. I finished this last book on April 1st. I only had like an hour and a half left in the audiobook, and I listened to the majority of it during March. So I'm counting it towards March, and you can't tell me what to do. So I read Wayward by Amelia Hart. This was on my TBR from last month, carried over, and I'm glad I got to read it because I really enjoyed it. So I listened to the audiobook, which was really good. There were 3 narrators, one for each main character, and I thought that was really well done. This one is historical fiction, and it takes place over the span of like 5 centuries. So there's 3 storylines, 3 women. There's Kate, who is in 2019. I might get these dates wrong. And then there's Violet, who's in 1942 during like World War II. And then there is Alpha, who is in 1619, I think. It kind of follows all of their stories. It goes back and forth from their perspectives throughout the book. And so Kate, in the present day, she has an abusive boyfriend. She's basically getting away from him. She inherits this wayward cottage by her great aunt Violet, who is one of the other perspectives in this book. She inherits this cottage and goes off to it and kind of discovers all these things about her family, uncovering these secrets that are kind of hidden in the cottage. So Violet, who is her great aunt, and we get her perspective in the 1940s. She's just kind of dealing with feeling lesser than just because she's a woman, not really having education or any say over her life, being compared to her brother and other men around her, just kind of finding her way in the world. And then Alpha is in the 1600s, and she is accused of using witchcraft to murder this farmer in her village. So it's kind of just going through the trial with her, goes into her backstory and kind of explaining what happened. Did she kill him? Did she not? What her powers are? Is she a witch? Then, of course, all their stories kind of converge at the end, and you learn a lot about their family history, the wayward women. And I'd say this is more magical realism than fantasy. I was thinking more fantasy, but it's more just the magical elements with like witchy vibes. There's a lot of kind of mystery, tension, and just beautiful, evocative writing. I love this. I listened to it pretty quickly. I was very intrigued. It felt slow paced, but not boring. I just love following each of these women and seeing how their stories intertwined, and I felt really connected to all of them as characters. This felt like a really good spring book. The cover is very fitting. Nature plays a huge role. Animals, insects, the garden, the wayward cottage also. It almost felt kind of like fairy tale, folklorish. Again, witchy vibes and very women-centric. This felt a lot like The Unmaking of June Farrow, which I read recently, as well as The Witch's Heart and The Lost Apothecary, which I didn't really like, but it did have some elements of that. I really thought like the parallel nature of their stories was interesting. There were a lot of similar things going on within their stories. There were some times where I had to kind of focus on their timelines and make sure I was not getting confused, but in general, the transitions were really well done between their timelines. To me, the ending was slightly underwhelming, which is why I didn't give it like a 5-star, but overall, I've really enjoyed it and don't really have any major complaints. I will say this is a very heavy book. There's a lot of triggers, so be aware of that. Physical, sexual assault, and then lots of themes related to pregnancy, some suicidal thoughts, just generally terrible men taking advantage of women and mistreating them. I felt very angry while reading this book on behalf of these women. So there's also definitely a theme of like the importance of the education of women and just having control over our bodies and lives, the strength and resilience of women. I just love watching them discover their powers and kind of uncovering their family history and discovering what they're capable of. I highly recommend it, and I'm going to leave you with a quote, or 2 quotes, or 3. Everything is made out of magic, leaves and trees, flowers and birds, badgers and foxes and squirrels and people, so it must be all around us. Perhaps one day there will be a safer time when women could walk the earth, shining bright with power, and yet live. Wayward they called us when we would not submit, would not bend to their will, but we learned to wear the name with pride. Highly recommend that. And that is my March month. Again, lots of really good ones, some new favorites, a lot of books I would definitely recommend. So let me know what you read in March, what some of your favorites were, and if you've read any of these, if you want to talk about them or have them on your TBR, just let's talk about these books. That is all for now. I will see you in my next video. Bye!